Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Med School Tutors webinar. Today, we're going to be talking to all of you guys about prepping for the virtual interview process. This is going to be uncharted territory for all of us. And so we'll share some of our advice. Sarah will share some of her tips and how we would recommend sort of starting this process this year and how to best evaluate residency programs in these unprecedented times. So my name is Sana. I am a second year resident. I'm PGY2, a first year radiology resident at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and I will be one of your co-hosts today. I've been with Med School Tutors for I think 4+ years now, and so hopefully we'll have some good tips for you, and I'll let my co-host introduce herself as well.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a PGY3 in internal medicine at Columbia. And I just, as of last night, finished this process for myself with the fellowship interviews. So I'm very well acquainted with the virtual Zoom interview world. I've also been with Med School Tutors for 4 or more years at this point and excited to answer some of your questions tonight.
Awesome. On that note, let's get started. So we have a pretty wide variety of topics that we're going to be going through. So first, we'll be talking a little bit about how COVID has affected the interview process and how things might change this year specifically, how to best set yourself up, what you can do both logistically in terms of your setting, your camera, etc., logistics, as well as how to prepare for the interview itself and the actual questions you'll be asked. And then, of course, this is not just you selling yourself. You also want to get a sense of what the best fit program will be for you and what the vibe is. And it's just definitely going to be a little more challenging this year in terms of getting a sense of where you'll fit in. But we can hopefully give you some insight as to how to make that process a little easier. And then, of course, we'll have a question and answer session towards the end. So with that, I'll let Sarah talk a little bit about who we are at Med School Tutors.
So for any of you who might not know us, we offer a wide range of services at Med School Tutors, from MCAT prep and pre-med and applications to medical school, all the way through advanced boards for medicine and other specialties. And we have a wide range of expertise. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us after the session at the email or phone number or any of our social media below.
Awesome. So first things first, congratulations to all of you. I assume that if you're on this, you have submitted your ERAS applications by now. And so now is the waiting period. And so I know some programs, depending on what specialty you're applying to, may or may not have already sent out interviews. Most, I think, are still sort of trying to process through. I know that my program, a lot of my friends' programs are still trying to get through. There are so many applicants every year, and especially now, to sort of go through. So we're waiting for all of these interviews. So try and relax and know that at this point, all of the hard work is really done, and now you're waiting to sort of prepare for the next steps. There are a lot of great questions that we get every year about when to reach out to programs, when you should start asking, when interviews start to come out. There are a lot of online forums about when interviews start to come out on different specialties and different programs. So I think it can be very useful to sort of stay apprised and just know if there's one location, one program that you really want to keep an eye on, to be aware of it, but also not to drive yourself too crazy, because sometimes it's easy to fall into a rabbit hole with those things. So just, get a sense from other people doing the specialty either at your school, or if you're applying to a specialty that's a little bit narrower, from the online community as well. And then we're going to sort of want to touch on how to really push yourself and advocate for you to get an interview spot. And so, of course, if you have certain preferences that you want to be in a certain area, that you want to go to a certain program, there are certainly things you can do. Sending letters to program directors, sending letters to residents, or reaching out to residents. Social media, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is a great resource to sort of learn about these programs and to specialize and have a chance to connect with people that you might not have had the chance to connect with in seasons past. And I think that, Twitter especially is becoming more and more of a source of how people are able to communicate and reach out and say, hey, I'm really interested in your program. This is something that's really important to me, and go onward. So just stay aware of those things. But I would say at least for the next probably month or so, just I would try and chill out and just keep an eye on things, but just start to expect to hear probably not for a couple of weeks. Any additional thoughts, Sarah?
I think the only thing is just once you hear that a program has sent out their invites, and if you haven't gotten one and it's a program you're very interested in, I think it's appropriate to contact the program director with very specific reasons why you're interested in that program. But if you don't hear back, I wouldn't keep sending emails. You kind of get one love letter to each program, and that's it.
Yep, totally agree.
Okay. So how has COVID-19 affected the process? I mean, as you guys know, everything is on Zoom or some virtual platform this year. And based on the fellowship cycle, which is just ending now, all programs are getting 30 to 40% more applications this year than they have in the past, either because people are applying to more programs or there's not the same cost of travel involved. So a lot of programs have, as a result, increased the number of interview spots that they have, but that does not mean they've increased the number of actual positions. So a lot of people are recommending that you interview at a few more programs than you would normally because your odds at each interview of matching is lower this year.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else to add, Sana?
Yeah, no, I think the biggest thing is the NRMP has really good data that they put out every year on the average number of interviews that you do. So I would just take that number, or the average number of interviews that the average person applying into each specialty does, rather. And I would look at that data, and then probably like maybe add 25% to that to get a good sense of how many interviews should I feel comfortable with, how many interviews should I be getting to know that I'm in a good position to match, where should I be, how many places should I be comfortably saying no to interviews at if you're so fortunate to be in that position. But really, to get a sense of what the actual numbers are, definitely take a look at that NRMP data, because that can be really helpful to get a sense, because it just varies so much based on which specialty you're going into. And then virtual interviews are going to be very different. So I can speak a little bit to this experience because I was a part of, or will be a part of this at my own program. But a lot of programs are still planning to have, and Sarah can speak to this too for the fellowship side, have some sort of happy hour. And so what that typically was in the past is there would be a pre-interview dinner or a pre-interview event that was primarily residents interacting with applicants. And the whole purpose of that was so the applicants would get a better sense of what the resident vibe is, what the residents' true feelings about their PDs, their programs, things that needed to be improved, things that were already amazing. So you could get a sense from the residents, so hear it directly. And I think that most programs really, really understand the value of that. And I would try and keep an eye out for whether or not programs are offering some sort of resident-specific thing, because I think that's really important. And there will be some format of that, whether it be the night before, whether it be during the interview itself. I think that'll just depend on, what they choose to do. But there will be a component of that where you can be a little bit more informal, hopefully, and talk more candidly about what you're looking for and get a sense of if that fits with the program that you're applying to. A lot of programs are also moving toward video previews. So they're making videos of, like, for example, I'm in Boston. We're making, what is it like to live in Boston? What is it like to be at the Brigham? And interviewing people from the program about what's your favorite thing about Brigham? What's your favorite thing about Boston? And things like that. So putting this content up online. And most of us have already done that or will be doing that before the interviews happen. And so when we talk about preparing for the interviews, we'll certainly touch on that a little bit more too. But that content should be available on their program websites. And if not, take a look on Twitter to see if it's there. There will also be sort of short, numerous interviews. So as opposed to, traditionally you could have maybe an hour-long interview with one person. And some programs were already moving away from this, but you could expect to see maybe multiple faculty members, multiple residents who will be interviewing you to get a sense of sort of different types of things. And then breakout sessions, again, to sort of highlight different features of their programs. If they have like an education track, if they have a research track, if they have a global health track, expect all of those things. I expect they'll still be highlighted, but certainly make a point to ask about them if they're not specifically brought up on the interview day. And then, as we mentioned, more interviews than usual. And I think another part that I wanted to add is probably a later interview season than usual as well. A lot of the interviews are getting shifted because of how ERAS got shifted. So just, it's going to be a little bit of a different timeline than it has been in years past. Anything else to add on that, Sarah?
So I can just sort of talk about my experience
Absolutely.
a little bit.
Yeah.
So for the happy hour component, each program's done it differently. Some people are doing it the night before, just like the traditional happy hours. Some are doing like a coffee lunch with the residents during the day. And then some people are actually doing it after the interview season has ended, so that you can ask more questions after you've finished all your interviews. Um, and then in terms of the number of interviews per day, I think now they seem to be ranging like 15 to 25 minutes instead of the like hour-long interviews that used to be. And then the last part about some interviews after your interview date, depending on your interests and whether someone was available, because it's all on Zoom now, some programs will arrange for you to talk with or meet with someone after your interview date for a separate Zoom call.
So definitely a very different season.
Definitely. So common virtual interview questions. So a lot of them are the same as what you would have prepared for a traditional interview. The most common being, tell me about yourself, and coming up with a good story about who you are and why you're applying into the specialty you're interested in. There will still be some behavioral questions about, tell me about a time you failed, or tell me what you would do in this situation where you disagree with an attending, things like that. So you should expect all the usual questions. A lot of programs may be asking, since you don't have to travel, why would you want to move to this place, especially if it's far from where you are, or what makes you apply to that program. You should be prepared to answer questions about anything that you include in your ERAS application. If you did a research project 3 years ago, I would just go through your ERAS application and make sure you can talk about what your role was on any of those projects.
They will definitely ask.
Definitely. And if you listed a hobby, someone is going to ask about it. So just read through your application before you go through the first couple interviews. And then some people, because every medical school and every state and city was affected differently, will ask you about, how did COVID affect your education? Did you miss a sub-I? Were you unable to take one of your exams? And it's a good place for you to advocate if there was anything that was really disrupted.
Yeah,
Anything else you'd add?
No, I think those are great points. I think, like you said, the majority of it will be pretty much the same as what you would have in a normal interview. I think the key things to highlight that just might be a little different are exactly like you said, what happens this past year, especially, most of the people who are applying right now were in the middle of third year when all of this stuff hit. So really to have something prepared. And I think one thing that Sarah and I were talking about before this was how she has been asked, tell me about yourself, God knows how many times. And so really to have something that's ready to go. Don't be caught off guard when someone asks you that question, because I would bet money that you will get asked this question at least almost certainly on your very first interview. So just, there are certain things that you can see coming, and that should be one of them. The COVID question should be one of them. And certainly why this program should be another few. And then some virtual logistics. So there are some Zoom specific things, or rather COVID specific things that are different this year. And so there are a lot of things to sort of keep in mind. Try and find a place where you can be in a somewhat calm and protected environment that doesn't have too much craziness happening around you. Virtual backgrounds are something that are very controversial. Which I don't know why they're controversial, but in general, generally discouraged. So try and just have your actual where you are behind you. Try and have something, not too crazy, as I mentioned. Internet connection should be strong, obviously. In general, if you have spotty Wi-Fi, if you're at all concerned about it, see if you can get the old school Ethernet cable out and see if you can do the wired connections, because those are generally more reliable. The last thing you want is to be at your dream program and to have spotty Wi-Fi affect the quality of the interview that you give. Good lighting is also very important. So generally, I have heard stories of a lot of people getting like the ring lights that the YouTubers use to like put up behind their computers, just so you have lighting projecting onto your face. In general, lighting coming from behind you is not the way to go. Lighting coming in front of you onto your face will better sort of illuminate. And then minimal background noise. So if you can be somewhere where there's generally, again, not like in the middle of a four-way intersection, just somewhere a little bit calmer, that would be important. And then, people if you're at home, if you have people in your household, just generally make them aware, these are my times. So just other things to sort of have in mind. Any other tips you have from the trail, Sarah? Anything that you picked up?
Well, I think we're going to talk about it a little bit more on the next slide.
All right,
if
perfect.
I'm remembering
Oh,
correctly.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So things to do and not to do. Basically, I would put on the Zoom screen before I start any interview to make sure I can tell everything that's going to show up behind me. And as you can tell, I have an extremely busy background, which was a bold choice on my part. Most people go with blank walls, strategic plants, some books, nice artwork, but do the best you can. Wear pants. You never know when you're going to have to get up.
Yes.
Shoes are optional. Make sure you turn off the alerts on your computer. Make sure it's on, do not disturb. Otherwise, they may hear or see some of your alerts of your texts, which can be awkward. I would have a list of questions ready to go for each program. And I would make sure they're very specific based on whatever videos they made in advance for you to see on their website. Or most program directors are going to give a half an hour to an hour introduction to the program and have some questions ready to go, which is taking notes on the introduction. Things not to do. I know we all think no one can tell when you're looking at your phone, even if it's right here, but people are watching your eye contact and can tell if you're looking at your phone. It is tempting to just have another screen and have a script of answers to questions. You can have notes, but someone can also tell if your eyes are reading from another screen, which goes to the try not to multitask. Really be focused, have good eye contact, the same body language you would have with someone during an in-person interview.
Yeah, I really want to second that part about the script. I know it's tempting because interviews are very stressful, and you have all of these questions that you expect people will ask you, and you have all these points you want to hit, and you don't always get to the things that you want to, or say them as eloquently as you might want to. But these programs, the vast majority of these programs are really looking for is a genuine person who can have a conversation and interact and just be sociable and talk to them normally. And so if you're reading from a script, if you sound perfect, honestly, I think it's more off-putting than if you're having an actual engaging back and forth discussion where you sound like a normal person. So really, I think it's much more important to sound genuine and like you're sort of not coming up with your answer off the cuff, but that you're sort of a little more just actively engaging in the conversation instead of reciting something. Another sort of point that we want to touch on is the common virtual interview, like what if something crazy happens? And so what I'll start by saying is life happens, and these programs understand that. They have also been dealing with COVID, and I can assure you not a single program in the country has done it perfectly. So pets, roommates, children running through, that's fine. That's great. Make a joke out of it. You can have cats and pick them up and just move them out of the way. But really, I think the biggest thing is for most program interviews, most of the ones that I went to, most of the internal medicine ones that my friends went to, are much more casual. So it's, if anything, it's a talking point. You can talk about your pets or talk about your children or something. And so use that as like, oh, I'm so sorry, blah, 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 my apologies. and then use it as a jumping off point to talk about your life, because they want to know you as people, not just as physicians, medical students, and potential residents. So it's a bigger picture thing. Computer crashing, again, I sincerely hope it never happens to anybody, but of course life happens and these programs understand that. So, if that happens, I think the best thing that you can do is send an email immediately. Most people have something on their phone. If not, try and, call someone, get access, go to a library, something that you can do just to get in contact with the program to let them know that something has happened. If you're able to find a backup computer, if you're able to find something else, great, try and, set that up. But if not, most of these places are will be very understanding and accommodating. So I think the biggest thing is to be prompt and upfront and just try and get in touch with them quickly. But it's just going to be a different set of challenges. And these are sort of the same what ifs as what if my plane is delayed? What if my plane doesn't take off when I'm trying to go to this place? What if my hotel doesn't have any more rooms? They're just a different set of challenges, and, we're just going to figure it out as we go along. And then another one is, what if they ask me a question that I didn't anticipate? And so that sort of goes back to what I was talking about before, is that you're not going to anticipate every question. Most of them, you should have some sense of what they'll ask you, but there are going to be things that come out of left field and you're going to say, I have to think about that for a second. And I think the most important thing that I did during some of my interviews was just take a second and say, that's a really interesting question. I hadn't thought about that. Just literally have that phrase on the top tip of your tongue, just to buy yourself maybe 10 seconds, and just use that to say, well, something, and, BS a little bit. Just give yourself a little bit of time to think. But I think, again, it's supposed to be an honest back and forth conversation. It's not supposed to be great question, and then recite off an answer. So I think that really that dialogue, and, as long as you're answering openly and honestly, I think that's really all you can do. Anything else to that, Sarah?
So I have a lot of experience with the first question, having a baby and multiple pets here.
Yep.
So especially for interviews where I knew that my child was here, and that there might be an issue, I would just be upfront at the beginning and say, this is my daughter's dinner time. She may walk through. My husband's going to do his best. And that was fine. Everyone understood that. I also warned people that I have cats that love to make an appearance in all of my Zoom interviews. And people found that, funny. It makes me a real person, a real doctor who has a life at home. And it, was a great conversation. Also this year, I think a lot of programs have agreed that they're not going to comment on the background, recognizing that people may not have access to a perfect situation. So, if they do ask a question, just be as honest as you feel comfortable being. But I have seen people do interviews from call rooms, from their basement, wherever it is that you can make it happen. Programs recognize that this is a weird year and we're all doing the best we can, and that we're all real people who live in real spaces.
Perfect.
Okay, so addressing red flags. I think the best advice for the interview season in general is to always just be honest. Address whatever it is that happened, whether it was a step score or a failure of a class, of one of your rotations. Just say what happened. And then try to figure out what you learned from it or how you overcame that particular obstacle, to give it a positive spin that this is something that happened, you recognize it, and you took active steps to do better or to overcome it in some way. People respect honesty, and they also really respect personal growth. They know that you're not perfect. So I think that's a good way to do it. What do you think, Sana?
Absolutely. I mean, the biggest thing is all of these people are real people too. And I think it's really easy to want, or it's very natural, I think, rather, to want to sell yourself as this perfect person who just was born without flaws. But I think that it's much more, again, I think the theme of what we keep saying is that they want real people, they want honest people, they want, colleagues. No one also wants to work with someone who is 100% perfect all the time. And so really to just be honest, but I think to be really, if what is a real red flag to me is when someone has a deficiency and is not, and tries to like brush by it and tries to say like, oh, this actually isn't a big deal. Like this is not, because that to me makes me question whether or not you've actually grown from that, or whether or not you acknowledge that and have, you know, seen something to work towards. And even if it's still a work in progress, you know, not that, oh, it was bad and now I'm fixed and I'm perfect, but just like, you know, it's something I'm still working on. I think that's much more important than to really be able to say that I'm 100% perfect all the time. Okay, now transitioning a little bit into how do we judge the programs, right? Because of course, you know, the program, you want to sell yourself as best you can, but you also are trying to figure out where you're going to be spending the next 3 to 7 years of your life too. And so how to really figure out what makes the most sense. So as we talked about before, most of you have already sent in and picked which programs you're applying to. And so now I think is a great time to sort of, while you're waiting for the interviews to come in, to settle in and figure out what's important to you. Is location very important? Do you really want to be close to your family? Do you really want to be in a specific city? Do you really want to be in a specific part of the country? Or do you really want somewhere that's very focused on academics? Do you want a very high research institution? Do you want somewhere that's more community, more clinical practice, and less focus on research? And just figuring out what's important. And some of those questions may be, I don't know. I don't have a preference at this point, which is completely fine. But if there are things that are important to you, try and figure out what those things are now, because that will make it that much easier down the line. And then once you figure out what things are important to you, it's really important to ask those questions of the program. So for example, if you are thinking about having a family during residency, it's very important to ask about what their parental leave policies are like. And it's sometimes a question that people are afraid to ask, but it's important to you. And at the end of the day, if it's more important to you than going to the most prestigious program in the whole world, you want to go somewhere where you're going to be happy. And so if you need to ask that question, if they're going to be offended by you asking the question, then they're probably not a program that you want to end up at. So I think that figuring those things out is really important. And so, you know, things like parental leave, things like research, things like really anything, figure out what's important and ask it in a smart and sort of tactful way. And one thing that a lot of my friends did, even, you know, pre-COVID, was try to have some sort of way of capturing the feeling that you have immediately after, because as you will learn by the end of interview season, they all blur together, especially now that you're going to be doing more interviews possibly than you had been considering doing pre-COVID. The days blend together, the people blend together. And so it's really important to sort of capture that moment immediately after. So you're going to be wiped at the end of the day, but just take a minute, 2 minutes, leave yourself a voicemail, just write down a text message to yourself and say, this is what I thought about this program. I felt like this was weird, but I felt like these things were really great. I'm not sure about this. Just a gestalt, and go from there. And then a running rank list. I actually made my running rank list before I even started interviewing, just based on the things that were important to me. So like location was very important to me, being close to my family, etc., whatever. And I had an idea of what I wanted, and things just sort of like moved up or down after interviews. But besides that, if I were starting from scratch, I don't know that I would have been able to sort of characterize those things as well, because again, things all start to blur together. Speak to anybody and everybody that you can. So speak to residents. I found that especially if your medical school has sent people to that program, try and talk to those people, because they can give you a sense of how is the transition from where you were to here, and what is it actually like. And there's just a certain sense of camaraderie that comes with that, where they'll try and give you an honest opinion and help you make your decision better. And then social media. So this is a little bit of a challenge, because a lot of programs are very, very active on Twitter and Instagram and posting all of these things, and they have residents and program directors and APDs very easily accessible. I think it's great to maintain a presence on social media if that's something that comes naturally to you, if you're comfortable doing that. I by no means think it's necessary to have a presence per se. I think sometimes just having one alone can be helpful for updates, because sometimes they'll post updates and new information on there. But in general, I would say same rule of thumb, just don't be annoying. So if you have questions that are important, if you want to reach out to a specific program, absolutely go for it. I would say once, maybe twice if you have a really good reason, but I wouldn't do it more than that, because again, these are real people. If you're messaging them all the time, they will get annoyed. So just keep that in mind while you're sort of going through this process. Anything else, Sarah, that you did while you were sort of going through this?
So I think you covered a lot of it. I think the two biggest things that I think are really helpful is, one, to make sure you ask all the questions you have.
Yeah.
Make sure you ask them in the most tactful way you can. If having a specific feature at a program is important to you, like you want a medical education track,
yeah,
but it's not on their website that they have one, maybe phrase it as, what opportunities are there to get involved in medical education? And then based on their answer, you can tell how formal that is. And then that kind of feeds into, if there's someone on your interview day that you didn't get to meet, you've done research on amyloid, and there's like an amazing amyloid center at the place you're going, you should ask someone that you're interviewing with, is it possible for me to meet someone who's going to do research in this area that I want to? Or if you're interested in going into GI and you don't get a chance to interview with someone from that department, ask. On Zoom, they can arrange it any day in the future.
Yep.
So I think that is a great way to help you make the decision.
Absolutely.
Okay, so ranking. This probably seems way off into the future, but I have submitted my list as of yesterday.
Oh my
It's very
gosh.
exciting. So how does it work? So every year we get all these questions about how to game the match, and there's no way to do it. It's a computer system. There's no way that if you rank this one above this one, that you're gonna game the system somehow. You should rank them in the order of which you would be most excited to match, regardless of how likely or unlikely you think you're gonna match there. Because it will go down your list from your most excited to least, and see if there are spots available at that program based on where they rank to you. And if the first one does not have spots for you, then it'll go down to 2 and 3 and then so forth down the list. And you should be very careful, especially this year with so many more applications, that you should list every program that you are willing to match at. You have to ask yourself, am I willing to not match rather than putting this program on my list? So I think those are things to consider. And then how to come up with your list. You're going to have that running rank list as you go through your interviews. At the end, maybe you're going to go back to think about those first couple that you've learned more about programs as you go through the process. And also just talk to the people in your life, whether that's other medical students who interviewed at similar programs with you, whether that's your partner, your family, to try and figure out what's the best fit for you. And for those of you who are doing a couples match, that makes it a little bit more complicated, to come up with basically every combination that you think you could live with, and rank them as best you can for both of you to get as high up to the top of your list as you can. And then, of course, the deadline is shifted this year, and it is March 3rd.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What else would you add on, Sana?
Yeah, no, I think the big thing for this year is it's going to be sort of a little bit different as far as getting a sense of the programs, and I think it's going to be a little bit harder to do that. So really, what's going to be really, really important this year, more I think even more than last year, is just talking to other people. So talk to as many people as you can from your program, other programs, anywhere, who have a sense, and try and get a vibe from the residents. I think my decisions were made almost entirely based on my experiences with the residents, because most places that you'll be interviewing will have probably fairly similar educational opportunities, fairly similar, research opportunities. And, there might be some degree of variation. I'm not saying that all programs are equal, but I think that after a certain point, you just have to think about, where am I going to be happiest? And I'll also say that a lot of effort gets put into this rank list process, and like, I have to rank at match at my number 1 or 2 or whatever. And I think that most people could be happy at any number of programs on the list. I personally can say fairly confidently that I would have been happy at any of my top 5. So I think that really keeping that in mind throughout this whole process is, yes, it's very important, and like, it's very stressful, but at the end of the day, most people will get a great training and will be able to be happy at most programs. So just to bring down the stress levels a little bit.
Agreed. Okay, so this is just a little bit more about us and our history of working with people through the residency match. A lot of our students have done very well in all of these specialties and at a lot of these places. So we just wanted to highlight some of our success. And if you're someone who might need a little bit more help with the process, we can connect you with someone to work one-on-one.
Yeah. And so the big things that we do sort of through the matching process, through our residency consulting services, is that we try and have sort of comprehensive things to help put together your application, go through the personal statement, go through the CV, help you prep for these interviews by asking you those tough questions and getting those sort of answers prepared. And then in that same vein, we are fortunate that we have a really great network of people, as we just showed, all over the country in every different specialty. So even if you're applying into ophthalmology and you really, really want to be in California, 2 things that I know very little about, I know someone at MST who knows a lot about it. So really just being able to use that network is very helpful as well. So on that note, I saw we have quite a few questions coming in, so I'm just gonna see if we can pull some of these up and get to them. So let me see what there is here. Okay, so one great question we have is, oops, sorry, my thing went away. So any questions, did you receive any interview questions, Sarah, during your time about clinical medicine, about your clinical acumen or medical skills?
No, I think that's pretty rare for like medicine, family medicine, psychiatry, those specialties. I've heard from some of my friends who match into surgery that maybe they got some of those questions, but in medicine, it's mostly, what do you want to do with your career? What are your goals? What kind of research have you done? It focuses a lot less on the specifics of your clinical skills.
Yeah, I found that as well. I mean, I applied for my prelim year in internal medicine and transitional year programs. So I did a number of those interviews, and then I did radiology interviews as well. And not once was I asked anything clinical at all. But having said that, I did hear some stories from some of my friends in orthopedic surgery who did have some clinical questions, but take that for what it's worth. Another great question I saw is, what is the best way to get in touch with residents who are alumni from your med school if you don't already know them? So this is a great one. So I think the best thing that a lot of medical schools have, and so I know that my medical school had one, is they have a network, and they keep a log of every single alumni and where they've gone and where they are now, if they're an attending and beyond. And so if I went to my dean of undergraduate medical education, is I think what her title was, she has a log of those, and she says, okay, what are you interested in? Where do you want to go? Here are some email addresses, and those you can opt in to be in that catalog. And so I think most medical schools have some variation of that, but certainly if they don't, then even by word of mouth alone, the dean of students or the undergraduate medical sort of coordinators, they will, even just off the top of their head, they will know people who can find that information out. So I would definitely reach out to your school administration, because they can put you in touch with people as well. Anything additional to add to that, Sarah?
I was gonna say, also this year, a lot of programs will have a picture of the name of every current resident, and then it usually will list where their medical school, maybe also where their undergrad was. And it's a little bit more awkward to kind of cold call people you don't know. But I would love to hear from people who are interested in my program. I'm sure Sana would be too.
Absolutely.
So as long, you send a message on Twitter or Facebook, whatever it is, to look someone up, most people are not going to be upset about that.
Absolutely.
And there was a couple of questions about backgrounds, virtual backgrounds, plants, curtains, all of those things, vases of flowers. So I don't know why the virtual background is considered controversial. It just is. And it was told to all of us on the fellowship trail not to do it, and I didn't see any applicants who did. That being said, I used this background for all of my interviews. It couldn't be any busier if I tried. So it's what you feel comfortable with. If you want to put a vase of flowers behind you, or some books, or a plant, go for it. It's where you're going to feel comfortable with your background.
Yeah, absolutely. One great question we got. So once you get an interview, are all applicants really on an even playing field, or do step scores still trump your interview quality? This is a great question, and has been asked many times and will be asked many more times. So the truth is, and I wish this weren't so, but I think that most programs have a general sense of how they want to rank you, or how you rank in the overall process before you even get there on interview day. And not all interviewees, in my opinion, and Sarah, feel free to jump in if you vehemently disagree. I think in most cases, step scores, research, all of the other things that go into making your application what it is, are still going to be major factors in that rank. Just getting that interview, it's not like a reset button. All of those things will still factor in, and you are not necessarily on the same level as the person sitting next to you on that Zoom call. So I think those things still matter. Having said that, that's not to say that the interview can't make a significant difference. Really being an engaging person, being able to have a real conversation, all those things we talked about are still going to be extremely, extremely important, and can make the difference between putting you, at the top of that rank list or at the bottom, because it's not one of those things where if they love you on your interview day, but you didn't have like a 280 on step, they're not going to put you at rank to match. Like if they love you, they will still love you. But I think that, all of those other things are still very important. And in all candor, I think that they probably have a sense even before you go in. Any thoughts on that, Sarah?
I completely and totally agree. The only reassuring thing about it is, if they give you an interview, you are qualified for that position. They are willing to have you match with that program. All of those things will still factor exactly where you fit in amongst the other applicants, but you've been narrowed down to like the top 10% of applicants to that program. So you have a great shot at matching there once you get the interview.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely agree. A great question I see here is, what are some of the best questions you had prepared for when the program's asked, do you have any questions for me?
I love this.
This is a good one.
For residency, I had one interview I will never forget in my entire life, where for 45 minutes, all the interviewer asked me was, what questions do you have? So I had to come up with 45 minutes of questions.
Oh, God.
That's a worst case scenario. And this year, I doubt you're going to have any 45-minute interviews to begin with. But some of the ones when I've really hit a wall on questions I can ask about the program are, what do you think will be evolving about the program in the next 3 years? The nice way to ask what changes or what things might need improvement. I ask them, especially now on Zoom, what part of your program do you think I'm not going to get a sense of through a Zoom call?
That's a good one. I like that one.
I also ask them, if you were in my shoes at this stage of my training, what advice would you have for me? And what questions do you think I should ask you?
Mm.
I have lots of ways of throwing it back at the person. How will your program help me become a infectious disease doctor? And then they can tell you about the opportunities in that.
Yeah.
So lots of broad questions, but it gives you a sense of what's important to them and what opportunities there are.
Yeah.
What about you? What questions did you have?
I definitely second the, the big things that are sort of classic that everyone's going to ask are the standard sort of like, what do you feel are the biggest strengths of this program? What do you feel are the biggest things that need improvement in this program? I always like to ask what brought you here. So, based on where they did their training and if they've stayed for a long time, what's kept them there, and to get a sense of, they've obviously had the opportunity to, well, I don't know about obviously, but they've probably had the opportunity to go elsewhere. And so what's kept them at a certain program for however long is a big one. And then when in doubt, just keep asking them about themselves if you're really running out of material.
Yeah, and then one that I asked this year was just how did their hospital handle COVID?
Absolutely.
Um,
Yep.
And, how are they doing? Because, we're all in tough positions, residents,
Yeah.
fellows, attendings alike, and get a sense of what's going on at the program and how did the administration respond?
Yeah, absolutely. Another great question we got is about advocating for an interview. So if your top choice program, for whatever reason, if they're done inviting applicants, when and how is the best way to reach out? This is a really great question. I think that the biggest thing I would say is in terms of finding out when this is happening, so logistically. So one of the things that I used a lot was Reddit has for every single subspecialty, they have the spreadsheets, or I don't even know if they're still using spreadsheets anymore, if they have
It's
like
WhatsApp this year.
Oh, okay. WhatsApp now.
At least it was on the fellowship front.
So all of these different ideas of like, oh, okay, like UMass has sent out interviews and like UCSF has sent out interviews, and you get a sense of like when the interviews are rolling out for the different specialties. Each specialty has a thing. And so go on Reddit. I actually think that's probably the most centralized place to find this information. And so just see if there's something available there to find. So that'll get you a sense of when it's happening. I will say a lot of interviews come out in waves, with the exception of a few programs. And those programs are, I think, sort of like historically known. So most of the people on these forums have been doing a lot of research, and they know that like, oh, this program always sends out interviews on this day of this month, like every year. I will say all of that's going out the window now with COVID, so I would kind of ignore that. But you'll get a sense of when a lot of interview dates are filling up. And so I would say probably around then. So once you see that a lot of interviews have gone out for this program, I would say probably if I had to give you like a rough time estimate, I would say like maybe pre-Thanksgiving, like a week or two before Thanksgiving would be my guess. At that point, I would send out my love letters. And again, I would say, like Sarah mentioned, you get one shot, make it really good, make it very personalized. And if you're sending them to a lot of programs, that's fine. But I think it's really easy to just write like a form letter, and they get a lot of these. So make sure that it's very specific as to why you want to go to this program, why it's really important to you. And then sort of, I would say, do your best that way. And I think a formal email to the program coordinator and the program director is the best way to go.
I think I would add to that, if you know anyone who has a connection to that program,
Yep.
that's another thing you can do, is if one of your letter writers went there for residency, or one of the residents, asking to see if maybe they would also send an email to advocate for you. That might be another way to get your foot in the door.
Yep, absolutely.
There's someone asking about supplemental applications. That did happen for fellowship applications for certain specialties. Medicine was not one of them, or cardiology was not one of them, but GI did. So be on the lookout that a program may contact you to fill out a supplemental application, which usually is short, and it is you expressing why that specific program you are applying to.
Mm-hmm. And I know that in the past, and I don't know if this is true or if this is what programs are doing this year, I would have to read more into it. In the past, certain programs have done like a screening process. For example, one of my really good friends is at Mayo Clinic for orthopedic surgery, and they had to do an initial video interview. So you first get a video interview, and then if you do well on the video interview, then you are offered another interview. So for some programs, it may be an initial screening tool. And for some programs, it may mean absolutely nothing and everybody gets it. So I wouldn't be able to say one way or the other whether it means a program is interested, but I think that will just require sort of more, it would depend on the specialty and it would depend on the program.
Someone's asking if all programs give you a letter of interest or denial. Unfortunately, some programs are going to ghost you.
Yep.
It happens every time.
Oh, yes.
It's distressing, and there's not much you can do about it. Some programs just will not send out rejection letters.
Yep. You will just never hear from them again. All right. What else we got? I think that may be most of our questions. I think the last thing that we'll touch on right now is just sort of like our final tips and thoughts on this sort of process this year. I know it's going to be challenging, and I really feel for you guys. Not being able to go to these programs, not being able to get a sense of what the residents are like is really challenging. But I think you just have to get more creative this year. And so really use social media to your benefit, use the internet, use these Zoom opportunities and the resident only things especially. I can't emphasize that enough. But try and take advantage of the opportunity you have to see more programs and the opportunity and the time that you'll have to go on more interviews and meet more of your future colleagues. And again, just be genuine, be honest, just try and be as not casual, but try and be as comfortable with yourself as you can be, because at the end of the day, like I keep saying, people just want to see that you're a real person, and they want to see all of your everything else that comes with the application. They've already seen the scores, they've already seen the grades, the essays, everything else. Now they just want to get a feel for if you're someone that would fit well in that little piece of the hospital. So I think that's really the biggest thing that I can stress, is to try and do that. And also that, again, most people will be happy at most places. So of course, take this seriously, but really, really understand and don't put too much pressure on yourself, because at the end of the day, you're going to get great training. So try and just enjoy the process and enjoy the opportunities. Any thoughts, Sarah?
I agree with everything you just said. I would say before each interview, do your homework about that program. Come prepared to know what you want to ask them, what you want to know on that interview day. And then on the interview day itself, relax. Yeah. Whatever happens, your computer crashes, whatever it is, it's going to be fine. Yeah. One thing we forgot to mention before is the program coordinator is going to give you their cell phone before each interview day. Just have that written on a piece of paper. Anything goes wrong, just call them. They will figure it out. You're gonna make it through. And it's actually gonna be kind of a fun, weird, fascinating, life-changing process. And if questions come up, we're here to help if you need it. And wish you guys all the best of luck.
Awesome. All right. Well, if anyone has any other questions that come up, feel free to email us, call us, pigeon, whatever. And we are so glad you could join us today. And thank you so much for being here.
Bye, guys.